I'm Rose, a 71-year-old widow who gave everything to raise my children after their father died too young. So when they called their own mother too much trouble and locked me away like some dirty secret, it wasn't just heartless, it was the deepest betrayal imaginable. Their biggest mistake was thinking I was too old and too broken to fight back. They wanted me silenced. Instead, I made sure their shame would echo through our family for generations. Welcome back to Granny's Tales. If you're new here, thank you for joining a community where wisdom meets survival, where second chances bloom from the darkest soil. Before we dive in, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is where you are right now. We love seeing this family of listeners spread across the world like seeds on the wind. 71 years I've walked this earth. For more than 32 of them, I walked it as a widow. My beloved husband Charles was taken from us far too soon, leaving me with our two precious babies, Marcus, who was 11, and Sophie, barely 7 years old. I can still feel that cold cemetery dirt under my shoes, their tiny hands gripping mine like lifelines, as I made a sacred promise over Charles's grave. I would move mountains to give them everything they needed. And Lord knows I kept that promise. I worked myself to the bone as a nursing supervisor at General Hospital, juggling double shifts with school conferences, homework help, and a house that always seemed to need more than my tired hands could give. This little ranch home on Maple Street became our fortress, a place I filled with homemade cookies, bedtime stories, and the kind of love that's supposed to last forever. Marcus grew into a sharp-suited corporate manager at some cold investment firm. Now 42, he carried himself like success was a cologne he'd bathed in. His wife Jessica, 40 years old and perpetually dissatisfied, made no secret of thinking my simple way of life was beneath their elevated standards. Sophie, my baby at 38, worked as a freelance photographer with her father's gentle soul, but lately she seemed to just drift along with whatever Marcus and Jessica decided was best. The disrespect started creeping in like mold in the walls. Sunday dinners, once our sacred family tradition, became their stage for casual cruelty. Really, Mom? These old dishes again? Jessica would sigh, running a manicured finger along the edge of the china Charles and I had picked out for our first anniversary. It's so outdated. Marcus and I were discussing how when we eventually renovate this place, we'll need something much more sophisticated for proper entertaining. Renovate this place? My voice would catch in my throat. This was still my home. Marcus would jump in without even looking at me, carving the roast with impatient strokes. Let's be realistic, Mom. This house is way too much for you now. We're just thinking practically. It needs major updates to be worth anything on the market, or for us to actually use it the way it should be used. That emphasis on us felt like a slap across my weathered cheek. Even my simple requests for help were met with theatrical sighs and eye rolls that could have won awards. Mom, the kitchen faucet again? Marcus would groan like I'd asked him to rebuild the entire plumbing system from scratch. You really need to hire a full-time handyman. Or better yet, move into one of those senior communities where they handle all this maintenance. You're not getting any younger, you know? Jessica would chime in with her voice dripping fake honey. He's absolutely right, Rose. You deserve to relax, not worry about leaky pipes and overgrown gardens. This yard looks like a jungle. Honestly, it's becoming an embarrassment to the whole neighborhood. My jungle was actually a garden of prize-winning roses Charles had planted with his own hands, a living testament to a love Jessica couldn't begin to understand. The only embarrassment was her complete lack of grace. Sophie would try sometimes, bless her heart. Mom's roses are gorgeous, Jessica. But her defense was weak, easily crushed by one sharp look from her sister-in-law or a dismissive wave from Marcus. More often, Sophie would just offer strained peacemaking. Now, let's not upset Mom. As if I was the problem for simply existing in the path of their grand ambitions. Sometimes Sophie would even echo their poison in softer tones. Maybe a smaller place would be easier, Mom. Less to manage. Those words from my own daughter cut deeper than Marcus's blunt cruelty or Jessica's stiletto remarks. The gaslighting became their favorite sport. Mom, you said last week you wanted us to clean out the attic, Jessica would declare coolly when I caught her pawing through Charles's personal belongings. I had said no such thing. That attic held 30 years of memories, our whole life together. Your memory's getting a bit fuzzy, isn't it, dear? She'd add, patting my hand with condescension that made my skin crawl. Marcus treated me like a confused child, Or worse, like furniture he was tired of looking at. If I tried to share something from my day, he'd openly scroll through his phone, muttering without hearing a single word. If I dared express an opinion about current events, he'd cut me off with, "Yeah, well, things are different now, Mom. You wouldn't really understand the complexities." He even started calling my home the property in conversations with Jessica, right in front of me, as if I was already a ghost haunting my own life. Their greed hung in the air like smoke. They weren't just eyeing my house, they were mentally redesigning it, planning additions, their voices dropping to conspiratorial whispers whenever I entered a room, then falling into guilty silence like children caught stealing cookies. I tried to stand my ground to remind them who I was and what this family was built on. "This house is full of your father's memory, Marcus," I said one afternoon, my voice shaking with hurt and growing anger. "It's my home, and I'm perfectly capable of managing both it and myself." Marcus had the audacity to actually chuckle. "Oh, Mom, don't get emotional. We're just being practical here. Sentimentality doesn't pay the bills, does it? Let's face it, you're not exactly in your prime anymore. We have to think about the future, our future." He glanced at Jessica, who nodded with smug agreement. Someone has to be the responsible adult in this situation. The implication that I, Rose, who had single-handedly raised these children while managing a demanding career for 3 decades, was not a responsible adult hit me like a physical blow. If you've ever been dismissed by your own children, write "respect" in the comments. If you've never experienced that particular heartbreak, write 1. But really think about it first. Their cruelty wasn't accidental anymore. It was calculated, designed to wear me down, to make me doubt my own mind. I could see the cold ambition burning in my son's eyes, the greed glittering in my daughter-in-law's gaze, and the frightened compliance in my own daughter's face. A terrible realization began forming like ice in my chest. They weren't just impatient or thoughtless. They were actively planning a future without me, or rather, with me conveniently removed from the picture. The love I had poured out so freely for so many years felt like it had curdled in their veins, turning them into strangers wearing my children's faces. The following Friday, Jessica swept into my kitchen without so much as a hello, moving like someone taking inventory of their future possessions. Marcus shuffled behind her, looking unusually shifty, avoiding my eyes. "Rose," Jessica announced, her voice artificially bright. "We've decided your lovely home would be perfect for a small charity fundraiser Marcus is hosting tomorrow night for some very important clients. Intimate gathering. Just a few key people. You won't even have to lift a finger." I stared at her, my coffee mug halfway to my lips, steam rising between us like a warning. "A party? Here. Jessica, you didn't even ask me." My house, my sanctuary of quiet comfort, suddenly felt invaded by their presumptuous plans. "And Marcus," I turned to face my son, "important clients? You always use that fancy country club downtown for business events." Marcus waved a dismissive hand like he was shooing away a bothersome fly. "Jessica thought a more personal touch was needed, Mom. More upscale, more impressive. Don't worry your pretty little head about it. We'll handle absolutely everything." Worry my pretty little head. I set my cup down with trembling hands. "This is still my home, Marcus. I decide who comes into it. And I'm not up for hosting a party." Jessica let out an exaggerated, patronizing sigh. "Rose, please don't be difficult. It's just for a few hours. Think of it as helping Marcus's career advancement. Besides," she added, her eyes scanning my kitchen with barely disguised contempt, "it'll give us a chance to see how this space could work with a more sophisticated flow." Their sheer audacity left me speechless. They weren't asking, they were informing me. My objections were being treated like the confused ramblings of a senile old woman. The argument that followed was short and vicious. My voice, usually steady and sure, was drowned out by Marcus's booming insistence and Jessica's sharp, cutting remarks about me being unsupportive and hopelessly stuck in the past. When I called Sophie later, desperate for an ally, she just murmured weakly, "Oh, Mom, just let them have their party. It's easier than fighting them. You know how they get when they don't get their way." Easier for whom, Sophie? Certainly not for me. The next morning, Saturday, as Jessica directed an army of caterers and florists who seemed to materialize from thin air, transforming my living room into something cold and sterile, I felt dread settling in my stomach like a stone. I was carefully moving a small vase of Charles's favorite roses from the coffee table. Jessica had declared them shabby and inappropriate for the aesthetic, when my foot caught slightly on the edge of the area rug. It was the tiniest stumble, a momentary loss of balance that I corrected almost instantly, steady as always. But Jessica, who had been watching me like a hawk watches a mouse, gasped dramatically. "Mother Rose, are you all right? Oh my goodness, you nearly took a terrible fall." Marcus rushed over, his face wearing a mask of exaggerated concern that didn't fool me for 1 second. "Mom, you see? This is exactly what we've been worried about. This big house, all these obstacles to trip over. You're simply not safe on your own anymore when you're this unsteady." "Unsteady?" I snapped, my patience finally wearing thin. "I barely stumbled. Marcus, I'm perfectly fine." No, you need to rest," Jessica insisted, her hand gripping my arm with surprising strength. "Somewhere quiet where you won't be underfoot during all these preparations, and where you won't risk another dangerous fall." Her eyes met Marcus's in a brief, almost imperceptible glance that made my blood run cold. "The attic, perhaps? It's out of the way. You can lie down up there. We'll bring you some tea." The attic. My blood turned to ice water in my veins. It was dusty, cluttered with forgotten things, and the stairs were steep and narrow. The attic? Don't be ridiculous, Jessica. I'm not going up there. "Mom, it's for your own safety," Marcus said, his voice taking on that firm, patronizing tone he used when he thought I was being unreasonable. "We can't have you injuring yourself with all these important people coming. We'd never forgive ourselves if something happened." They began to gently but inexorably steer me toward the narrow attic stairs. Sophie appeared then, her face pale as moonlight, her eyes wide with something that looked like fear. "Marcus, Jessica, maybe this isn't such a good idea," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Sophie, darling, don't you start," Jessica said sharply, not even bothering to look at her. "We know what's best for your mother. She needs a quiet place to rest, so she doesn't get agitated and fall again." My protests, my growing alarm, were completely ignored. With a horrible sense of unreality, like I was trapped in a nightmare, I found myself being guided up those narrow stairs. The air grew colder and dustier with each step. Marcus opened the attic door, revealing the shadowy, cluttered space filled with boxes and memories. "There we go, Mom," he said almost cheerfully. "Nice and peaceful up here. We'll check on you later." Before I could fully process what was happening, before I could unleash the scream building in my chest, they ushered me inside, stepped back, and I heard the click. Not just the click of the old latch, but another sound more definitive, more final. The sound of a key turning in a lock they must have installed specifically for this moment. Panic, cold and sharp as winter wind, clawed at my throat. "Marcus! Wait! Let me out! This isn't funny." I rattled the doorknob frantically. "Help!" I pounded on the heavy wooden door until my fists were bruised. "What do you think you're doing?" My voice became a raw shriek. No answer. Just the distant, muffled sounds of their voices downstairs, already moving on with their plans. Then the faint strains of music starting up, the sounds of their party beginning in my own home. For 2 terrifying days and nights, that attic became my prison. The first few hours were a blur of disbelief and rage. I screamed until my throat was raw and bleeding, pounded until my hands were swollen and bruised. But my prison was solid oak. My jailers were deaf to my pleas. There was no tea, no one checking on me as promised. They had left a single dusty bottle of water and a package of stale crackers on an old trunk, a cruel afterthought like leaving scraps for a dog. The small, grimy window offered no escape, only a view of the treetops and a world that seemed impossibly far away. The nights were the worst, cold seeping into my bones from the bare floorboards, strange shadows dancing in the moonlight, every creak of the old house sounding like footsteps, like threats. Humiliation burned through me hotter than anger. My own children, my son, my daughter, the daughter-in-law I had tried so hard to welcome into our family, had done this to me. Rose, the woman who had sacrificed everything for them, was being treated like unwanted garbage, locked away and forgotten so they could entertain their important guests in my own home. Saturday evening, the sounds of their party drifted up through the floorboards. Laughter, clinking glasses, the thumping bass of music I didn't recognize. Each burst of merriment was a fresh stab of betrayal. I was trapped up here, cold, alone, terrified, while they celebrated below using my home, my life as their stage. The depth of their deception, their calculated cruelty, settled on me like attic dust, heavy and suffocating. They hadn't just wanted me out of the way for a weekend. They wanted to prove to themselves and the world that I truly was just too much trouble, too inconvenient to matter. And in the darkness of that attic prison, with the mocking sounds of their revelry below, a terrifying thought began taking root. What if they never planned to let me out? Please like this video and subscribe to our channel if you think what happened to me was wrong. Because stories like mine need to be heard, need to be shared, need to matter. The dawn of the third day brought a chilling clarity that cut through my despair like sunlight through fog. The distant sounds of my children cleaning up after their disgusting party, the clatter of dishes, the murmur of voices now drained of forced gaiety, had faded with the night. I was still locked in, still cold, still achingly hungry and thirsty. The single bottle of water was long empty, the crackers just a memory. But something had shifted inside me. The initial terror and raw panic had crystallized into something harder, sharper. A cold, simmering rage and a desperate determination not just to survive, but to emerge with my spirit intact. They thought they could break me, erase me like an embarrassing stain. They were about to discover just how wrong they were. It was then, as I sat huddled in a moth-eaten armchair Charles had stored up there years ago, that a flicker of hope ignited in the fog of my despair. Charles's old emergency phone. He'd kept one of those ancient brick-like cell phones in a metal box with his military mementos, convinced it was more reliable than modern gadgets. He'd charged it occasionally just in case. After he passed, I'd packed the box away up here, unable to part with those remnants of his careful nature. Hope, dangerous, fragile hope, fluttered in my chest like a bird against a window. I fumbled in the dim light filtering through the grimy attic window, my stiff fingers pulling at dusty boxes, whispering a prayer to Charles's memory. And there it was, the metal box. Inside, nestled among metals and old letters, was the phone. I pressed the power button, holding my breath like I was making a wish. The screen flickered, then miraculously glowed to life, showing 2 precious bars of battery. Enough. Just enough. My fingers, clumsy with cold and desperation, dialed Mrs. Patterson's number. She lived across the street, a kind, sensible woman who'd been our neighbor since Marcus and Sophie were small. She answered on the second ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Eleanor?" she asked, probably surprised by the unknown number on her caller ID. I'd used her middle name as our secret code for years, if I ever needed help discreetly. "Yes, Dorothy," I whispered, using her code name for me, my voice barely recognizable from screaming. "It's Rose. I think there might be a problem over here. I'm smelling something like gas, maybe? I'm a little confused and frightened, and I can't seem to get Marcus or the children's attention. Could you possibly come check if everything looks normal from outside?" I kept my voice deliberately weak and quavering, like a confused old woman unsure of what she was experiencing. A gas leak was something no neighbor would ignore, something that demanded immediate action. There was a pause, then Dorothy's voice, sharp with concern. "Gas smell? Rose, you stay exactly where you are if you can. Don't touch anything electrical. I'm calling the gas company right now, and I'll be right over." Relief washed over me so powerfully I nearly collapsed. She understood. She didn't question. Now I just had to wait and prepare for what came next. It felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes when I heard the commotion downstairs. Dorothy's firm, no-nonsense voice, then the deeper tones of emergency responders, and finally Marcus's raised, flustered voice laced with false concern that made my stomach turn. "Mother! Mother Rose, are you up there?" came his voice through the door. "We were so worried about you." Then the sound I'd been praying for. The key turning in the lock. The door creaked open and Marcus stood there, Jessica hovering behind him like a vulture, their faces wearing carefully constructed masks of shocked relief. Sophie, pale and wide-eyed, peered around them. "Mom! Oh, thank heavens!" Marcus exclaimed, rushing toward me with outstretched arms I had no intention of falling into. "Mrs. Patterson said you called about smelling gas. We were doing cleanup after the gathering and thought you were resting peacefully in your room. You must have wandered up here and the door must have gotten stuck." "Oh, we've been frantic," Jessica chimed in, her voice oozing artificial sympathy. Rose darling, you gave us such a terrible scare. Getting confused and locking yourself in the attic like that. Are you feeling all right? You look so frail and disoriented. I allowed myself to sway slightly, leaning heavily against a dusty trunk, my hand fluttering to my forehead like a confused old woman. Oh, Marcus. Jessica. What happened? I felt dizzy yesterday morning after my little stumble. You said I should rest up here where it was quiet, didn't you? I looked around with feigned bewilderment. Did I fall asleep for a very long time? Their eyes met in a quick shared glance of what looked like relief mixed with triumph. They thought their problem had solved itself, that I was now too confused and addled to remember the truth, too broken to challenge their version of events. Sophie rushed forward, her face a mess of conflicting emotions. Oh, Mama, I was so worried, she cried, helping me to my feet. Her hands were trembling. Was it guilt or fear of being exposed? The emergency responders, after a thorough check, declared there was no gas leak. A fiction I had created, my first small act of defiance and survival. Dorothy Patterson looked at me with sharp, knowing eyes over Marcus and Jessica's fussing, but she played along perfectly, expressing relief that I was found safe, though apparently confused. My children, my jailers, were now my solicitous caretakers, full of apologies for the misunderstanding, for not checking on me more thoroughly while I was resting so peacefully. They cooed and clucked over me, their insincerity a suffocating blanket of false concern. I played my part to perfection. I was weak, disoriented, my memory of the weekend conveniently patchy and unclear. I allowed them to fuss over me, to settle me back in my own bedroom, the room that no longer felt like mine, the room where I was supposedly confused about everything that had happened. That night, after they had finally left, after showering me with promises to take much better care of me from now on, the real Rose emerged from the shell of the frail, confused old woman I had pretended to be. The rage was still there, burning like a coal in my chest. But it was now accompanied by something far more dangerous, a steely resolve and crystal clear purpose. They had underestimated me completely. They had mistaken my love for weakness, my trust for senility. They had locked me away like an animal, and now they would pay the price. What would you do if it were your mother? Share your thoughts in the comments because I need to know there are still people out there who understand that love shouldn't come with locks and keys. My mind, far from being fuzzy as they believed, was sharp as winter air. I needed more than just my word against theirs. I needed their own voices, their own admissions to condemn them. The seed of a plan, daring and dangerous, began to take root in my mind. I needed a way to record them, to capture their truth when they thought no one was listening. The next day, feigning a sweet desire to keep my mind active with modern technology, as Jessica had once so condescendingly suggested, I asked Sophie to help me order a few things online. Simple items for an old lady trying to stay current. Among them, slipped in like an innocent afterthought, was a small, discreet voice-activated digital recorder. For my doctor's appointments, sweetheart, I told her with a wavering smile. So I don't forget his important instructions. Sophie, drowning in guilt and eager to appease her conscience, readily agreed to help. The recorder arrived 3 days later in a plain package. I spent hours learning its secrets, practicing with its range and sensitivity, understanding exactly how it worked. My children thought they had a more manageable, more broken mother on their hands now. They had no idea I was methodically preparing for war, and they themselves were about to provide all the ammunition I would ever need. The weeks following my attic incident, as Jessica so delicately termed it, were a masterclass in deception. My deception. I became a ghost in my own home, a fragile echo of the vibrant woman I had always been. My movements were slower, my voice softer, my gaze often distant as if struggling to grasp the present moment. I forgot names, misplaced my reading glasses constantly, often right on top of my head, much to their eye-rolling amusement, and drifted off during their self-important monologues about renovations and improvements. It was a demeaning role to play, a constant swallowing of pride that tasted like bitter medicine. But every condescending pat on my hand, every patronizing smile they exchanged over my confused head, only fed the icy determination growing in my heart. That tiny voice recorder became my closest companion, my silent weapon, always tucked in my sweater pocket or nestled among yarn in my knitting basket. Marcus was my first target. My son, once the apple of my eye, Now a man whose arrogance had become his defining characteristic. I waited for an afternoon when Jessica was out at one of her essential charity luncheons. I found him in Charles's old study, already measuring walls with a contractor's tape, a predatory gleam in his eyes as he calculated square footage and potential. "Marcus, dear," I began, my voice deliberately quavering as I leaned against the doorframe for support. My mind is still so jumbled from that weekend, that attic business. I keep trying to piece it together. I pressed a trembling hand to my temple. "You were trying to protect me, weren't you? From hurting myself after my fall." He puffed up immediately, just as I knew he would, like a rooster preening. "Exactly, Mom. Someone had to take charge of the situation. You weren't yourself that day. You were becoming a liability, honestly, especially with those important clients Jessica and I were trying to impress. We couldn't risk you having some kind of episode or scene in front of them." He lowered his voice conspiratorially, leaning closer. "The attic was just a temporary solution to keep you safe. Out of sight, out of mind, so you could rest peacefully and we could handle our business. It was for the best, really. You can see that now, can't you?" The tiny recorder in my pocket captured every damning word. His casual admission that I was a liability, his chilling out of sight, out of mind philosophy, his complete certainty that what was best was whatever served his purposes. Jessica proved more challenging, with her sharp eyes and naturally suspicious nature. I approached her under the guise of seeking her sophisticated advice. "Jessica, darling," I said, finding her scrolling through expensive interior design websites in my living room, a look of barely concealed distaste on her face as she surveyed Charles's favorite reading chair. "Since my episode, I've been thinking maybe this old house really is becoming too much for me to handle. You have such exquisite taste and vision. If Marcus were to take over the management of things more formally, what would you envision for the space?" Her eyes lit up like a child's on Christmas morning, that predatory gleam I knew so well. "Oh, Rose," she purred, launching into an enthusiastic monologue. "This place has incredible potential buried under all this outdated clutter." She gestured dismissively at my cherished belongings, my lifetime of memories. "We'd open up this entire area, naturally. Clean modern lines. Perfect for the caliber of entertaining Marcus needs to do for his career advancement." That weekend when we hosted those clients, it was really just a trial run to see how we could optimize the space once we have complete creative freedom. She paused, studying her manicured nails. "It's all about elevation, Rose. Moving beyond sentimentality into something truly sophisticated." Her callous dismissal of my life's treasures, her admission that the party weekend was a trial run for her takeover, her phrase about having complete creative freedom. It was all captured perfectly, her own voice sealing her fate. Sophie, my sweet, conflicted daughter, was both the easiest and hardest to record. Easiest because her guilt was a raw, exposed nerve I could gently press. Hardest because part of my heart still ached for the loving daughter I remembered beneath all this weakness and fear. I found her one gray afternoon staring out the kitchen window, a mournful expression clouding her features like she was watching her own conscience through the glass. "Sophie, honey," I said softly, placing what I hoped felt like a trembling hand on her arm. The tremor wasn't entirely pretend this time. "That weekend in the attic. I keep trying to piece it all together, but it's like trying to remember a bad dream. Was I truly being so much trouble for all of you?" Tears immediately welled in her eyes like spring water. "Oh, Mama," she choked out, turning to wrap me in a hug I endured with a frozen heart. It wasn't supposed to be like that. I mean, Marcus and Jessica were just so insistent, so convinced they knew what was best. They said it was for your own protection after your fall, that you were getting agitated and might hurt yourself." Her voice dropped to a whisper heavy with shame. "I told them it felt wrong, Mama. I really did try to object, but they just steamrolled right over me like I wasn't even there. I felt so awful leaving you up there alone. I could hear you calling out, but Marcus said not to go up, that it would only make you more worked up and confused." The pain in her voice was real, cutting through my anger like a knife. "I'm so sorry, Mama. It was horrible, but I didn't know what else to do. I was scared of them, scared of standing up to them." Her tearful confession, her admission of hearing my cries for help, her fear of her own brother and sister-in-law, it was all there, captured in her own broken voice. Perhaps the most heartbreaking recording of them all. because it was laced with genuine remorse alongside inexcusable weakness. Night after night, I transferred these audio files to a secure folder on Charles's old laptop, listening back with grim satisfaction that warred with fresh waves of pain. Their voices, stripped of all pretense and social masks, filled my quiet evening hours. Marcus's arrogant justifications, Jessica's cold calculations, Sophie's tearful self-preservation. It was a sickening symphony of betrayal, but it was also my salvation. Maintaining the facade of a broken, forgetful old woman was exhausting work that wore on my soul. There were days I wanted to scream at their patronizing remarks, to throw their false offerings of help back in their smug faces. But the thought of the upcoming family reunion, the vision of their stunned, horrified expressions as their own words condemned them, kept me strong. I had even suggested, with feigned nostalgic enthusiasm, that we host one last big family gathering at my house in the backyard, just like the old days. They readily agreed, no doubt seeing it as another sign of my docile acceptance of their control, their management of my life. They thought they were humoring the confused old lady, keeping her calm and manageable. They had no idea I was the one pulling every string, patiently weaving the net that would soon ensnare them all. The recordings were my ammunition, carefully organized and edited only for length, never for content. Their true selves captured in their own damning words. The reunion was just 2 weeks away, and I, Rose, the supposedly frail, confused mother, was ready for justice. Drop a red heart in the comments if you've ever had to pretend to be weaker than you are just to survive. Because sometimes the strongest thing an old woman can do is let people underestimate her completely. The day of our annual summer family reunion dawned bright and warm, a perfect contrast to the icy determination that had settled in my heart like armor. For weeks, I had moved through my days like a shadow of myself, my outward frailty a carefully constructed mask hiding months of meticulous preparation for this very afternoon. Charles's old laptop held my symphony of evidence, each audio file a nail in their collective coffin. The small Bluetooth speaker I'd bought for listening to my gospel music in the garden was fully charged and ready. My backyard, usually a source of simple joy with its blooming roses and shady oak trees, gradually filled with the cheerful sounds of the Martinez family gathering. Aunts, uncles, cousins, nieces, nephews, they came carrying covered dishes, folding chairs, and the easy laughter of people expecting a pleasant afternoon of food and fellowship. This reunion had been my tradition, started with Charles decades ago, a day to strengthen family bonds. This year it would serve a very different purpose. Marcus, Jessica, and Sophie arrived together, presenting a united front of performative concern. Marcus carried an elaborate fruit basket. "Just making sure you're getting proper nutrition, Mom," he announced loudly enough for nearby relatives to witness his filial devotion. Jessica, dressed in crisp white linen that probably cost more than my monthly pension, air-kissed my cheek while her eyes critically assessed the yard, no doubt calculating how soon she could update the landscaping. Sophie offered a hesitant hug, her eyes full of familiar anxious guilt that she quickly masked with a bright false smile. They fussed over my chair placement, offered to fetch plates of food I didn't want, adjusted my sun umbrella with theatrical concern. Every gesture was a patronizing reminder of the role they'd assigned me, the doddering old mother, easily managed, soon to be forgotten. I let them perform, playing my part perfectly, my heart beating steady and cold against my ribs like a countdown timer. As the afternoon wore on, as plates were filled and children shrieked with laughter on the lawn, I watched them with new eyes. I watched Marcus hold court with his uncles, boasting about recent business deals with confident bluster. I watched Jessica charm my nieces with tales of her charity work, her voice smooth and cultured as expensive wine. I watched Sophie sitting quietly on conversation edges, picking nervously at her food, her gaze flitting toward me with worry. They were so comfortable in their deception, so secure in believing their attic secret was safe, that their mother was a broken, compliant shell of her former self. Finally, as shadows began lengthening across the yard, I knew the time had come. I asked my nephew David, a good-hearted young man with kind eyes, to help me get everyone's attention. "Quiet down, everyone. Quiet down," David called out with his naturally booming voice. "Aunt Rose has something special she'd like to share with the family." A hush fell over the 30-odd family members scattered across my backyard. All eyes turned toward me with the respectful attention given to beloved elders. I rose slowly, leaning perhaps more heavily on my cane than strictly necessary, my small digital recorder clutched in one weathered hand, the Bluetooth speaker discreetly positioned on the picnic table beside me. Marcus, Jessica, and Sophie exchanged slightly uneasy glances. What was the old woman planning now? Thank you all for coming. I began, my voice soft but carrying clearly in the sudden stillness. It warms this old heart to see so many generations of our family gathered here in the home Charles and I built with so much love and hope. I paused, letting my gaze sweep over them, finally resting on my 3 children with deliberate weight. This year, I wanted to do something a little different. I have a special family tribute I'd like to share. A testament, really, to my loving children Marcus, Sophie, and my dear daughter-in-law Jessica, and their unique approach to family devotion. A flicker of genuine alarm crossed Marcus's face. Jessica's practiced smile tightened like a wire. Sophie looked like she wanted the earth to open and swallow her whole. With a steady hand that surprised even me, I pressed play. The first voice to shatter the peaceful afternoon air was Marcus's, smug and self-important. Someone had to take charge of the situation. Mom wasn't herself. You were becoming a liability, honestly, especially with those important clients we were trying to impress. The attic was just a temporary solution to keep you safe. Out of sight, out of mind, so you could rest and we could handle our business. It was for the best, really. A collective gasp rippled through my assembled family like wind through wheat. I watched my sister Carol's mouth fall open as she stared at Marcus in shock. Marcus himself had gone rigid, his face turning a sickly shade of gray-green. Then Jessica's cool, disdainful voice filled the horrified silence. This place has incredible potential buried under all this outdated clutter. That weekend when we hosted those clients, it was really just a trial run to see how we could optimize the space once we have complete creative freedom. It's all about elevation, moving beyond sentimentality. Jessica shot to her feet, her face a mask of fury and panic. What is this? Turn that off, Rose. This is a complete invasion of privacy. You're twisting everything, taking things out of context. But her voice was drowned out by the growing murmurs of disbelief and disgust from our relatives. And then Sophie's tearful, choked confession filled the air like smoke. Oh, Mama, it wasn't supposed to be like that. Marcus and Jessica were just so insistent. I told them it felt wrong, Mama, I really did. I felt so awful leaving you up there alone. I could hear you calling out, but Marcus said not to go up, that it would only make you more worked up. The recordings continued, snippet after damning snippet. Marcus discussing the house's market value as if I were already dead and buried. Jessica complaining about my embarrassing old-fashioned ways. Sophie admitting they had deliberately locked the attic door and left me there. Each word, each justification, each moment of casual cruelty was laid bare for all to hear in their own voices, speaking their own truth when they thought no one was listening. When the last recording faded into silence, the quiet that descended was absolute and bone-chilling. No one moved. No one even seemed to breathe. Then my brother-in-law, Uncle James, slowly rose to his feet. His weathered face was like thunder as he turned his gaze from Marcus to Jessica to Sophie, who was now openly sobbing into her hands. Marcus, Uncle James said, his voice low and dangerous as a gathering storm, you locked your own mother in an attic. Your mother. The woman who raised you. Marcus tried to bluster, his face a mottled mixture of red and white. It was a misunderstanding. She wasn't well. We were genuinely concerned for her safety. Concerned. My sister Carol's voice cut through the air like a whip crack. That's not concern I heard on those recordings, Marcus. That was greed and contempt. How could you? After everything Rose has sacrificed for you children. The dam of family decorum burst completely. Voices rose in outrage like a chorus of the betrayed. Accusations flew like arrows. Marcus stammered pathetic excuses that convinced no one. Jessica tried to hiss denials that fell on deaf ears, her carefully constructed composure cracking like ice in spring. Kayla just wept, a broken, pitiable figure drowning in her own shame. They found themselves surrounded not by loving family, but by a jury of their peers, faces etched with disgust and moral condemnation. The edifice of their lies crumbled to dust before my eyes, and I stood there watching with bitter satisfaction mixed with profound sorrow. There was a bitter taste in my mouth, the taste of a mother's grief for children she had lost not to death, but to their own avarice and cruelty. But beneath that sorrow, something stronger and cleaner was rising. The taste of justice finally served. My performance was over. Theirs was just beginning under the harsh, unforgiving spotlight of truth. If you think they got what they deserved, write justice in the comments. If you think I went too far, write too much. I need to know where you stand because what came next changed everything. The silence that followed was heavier than granite, broken only by Sophie's ragged, hysterical sobs echoing across my backyard like the sound of something irreparably breaking. Marcus stood frozen, his usual bluster completely deflated, looking like a man watching his entire world collapse in real time. Jessica, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, was speechless, her perfectly composed mask contorted into something ugly and desperate. Uncle James, his voice carrying the quiet authority of the family patriarch he'd become since Charles passed, was the first to break the spell of stunned silence. Marcus, Jessica, Sophie. Each name fell like a gavel. I think you three owe your mother and every single person here an explanation. Though frankly, after what we've all just heard, I can't imagine any explanation that would excuse such calculated cruelty. That opened the floodgates of family outrage. My sister Carol, usually so gentle and diplomatic, rounded on Jessica with fire in her eyes. You scheming, heartless woman. To treat Rose like that in her own home. The home she opened to you. My nieces and nephews, who had grown up adoring their Aunt Rose, looked at their cousins Marcus and Sophie with expressions of pure revulsion. Children who had played together, shared holidays, grown up as friends, now seeing each other as strangers. Marcus tried desperately to stammer some defense, something about misunderstandings and me not being myself, but his words were drowned in a rising chorus of disgust and disbelief. Jessica, ever the fighter, attempted a venomous retort aimed directly at me. You manipulative old witch. You set us up. You recorded private conversations. But even her own husband flinched away from her venom. The public exposure was apparently enough to momentarily sever their toxic alliance. Sophie simply crumpled further, her body shaking with sobs that seemed to come from her very soul. It was terrible to witness, the complete unraveling of a family's carefully constructed facade. But amidst the chaos and ugliness, something extraordinary began happening. One by one my relatives came to me. My cousin Maria stood up, her eyes blazing with protective fury, and took my weathered hand in both of hers. Rose, you're coming home with me tonight. You shouldn't be alone after this betrayal. My nephew David, the same young man who had helped me with the microphone, put a strong protective arm around my shoulders. We've got you, Aunt Rose. We've always got you. Offers of support, expressions of outrage on my behalf, declarations of love, genuine unconditional love, surrounded me like a warm protective embrace. They saw the truth clearly. They understood completely. And they stood with me without hesitation. In that moment of chaos and revelation, I realized something profound. I wasn't the lonely, discarded old woman my children had tried to make me. I was Rose Martinez, matriarch of a large, flawed, but ultimately loyal family. And I was not alone. I had never been alone. The days and weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity, but it was purposeful, cleansing activity that felt like spring cleaning for the soul. Marcus, Jessica, and Sophie became pariahs within our extended family and community. The story of their actions, especially the attic imprisonment, spread through our neighborhood and social circles like wildfire. Marcus's business associates, some of whom had attended that fateful party in my home, suddenly found him less appealing as a colleague. Jessica's precious charity committees quietly distanced themselves from her toxic presence. The shame clung to them like smoke, isolating them far more effectively than any locked door ever could. For me there was vindication, yes, but it came with a weight of profound sadness. These were still my children. The babies I had rocked through fevers, the teenagers whose heartbreaks I had mended with homemade cookies and patient listening. Seeing them so utterly broken and disgraced brought a deep ache to my mother's heart, even as the survivor in me acknowledged the harsh justice of their fate. But slowly, like sun breaking through storm clouds, I began to feel something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. The weight of their betrayal, the years of feeling diminished and disrespected, finally began lifting from my shoulders. I could breathe deeply again, stand straighter, speak with my true voice. With Uncle James and my sister Carol's unwavering support, I consulted an excellent attorney. We discussed the unlawful confinement, the emotional distress, the systematic abuse. While I had no desire for a protracted court battle that would only prolong everyone's agony, taking legal steps to document their actions and secure my future felt absolutely essential. My will was completely rewritten, power of attorney documents updated and strengthened. Marcus and Jessica were removed from my life and legacy as cleanly as a surgeon removes diseased tissue. They would inherit nothing from me but the natural consequences of their own choices. Sophie presented a different challenge entirely. She came to me one gray morning about a week after the reunion, alone and stripped of all pretense. Her face was pale and ravaged by sleepless nights, her eyes red-rimmed from constant weeping. She didn't offer excuses or try to minimize her role in my imprisonment. She simply sat at my kitchen table, the same table where she'd eaten thousands of childhood meals, and laid her soul bare. "I know sorry isn't enough, Mama," she whispered, her voice raw and broken. "I don't expect forgiveness and I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I will carry what I did, what I allowed to happen, for the rest of my life. It will never leave me." Her pain seemed genuine, her remorse as deep as an ocean. But trust, once shattered so completely, doesn't mend easily or quickly. "Sophie," I told her, keeping my voice gentle but absolutely firm, "what you children did cut me to the very core of who I am. Forgiveness is a long, difficult road, and I honestly don't know where it leads yet. Perhaps someday, if your actions show real and lasting change, we might find a different path forward. But for now I need time and space to heal. And you need to figure out who you are when you're not just following Marcus and Jessica's lead." I left the door slightly ajar for her, the tiniest sliver of hope, but made it crystal clear that the journey back to any kind of relationship would be entirely hers to walk, and it would be long and uncertain. Please like the video and subscribe to our channel, because every elderly person deserves to have their story heard and their dignity respected. My home, once a place of creeping dread and constant tension, slowly began feeling like mine again. I reclaimed it room by room, memory by memory. I filled it with fresh flowers, with music Charles would have loved, with the laughter of friends and family members who now visited more often than ever. Their respect for me had been renewed and deepened by witnessing my strength. That attic door remains unlocked to this day, a silent testament to a nightmare survived and overcome. Life has settled into a new rhythm, one of hard-earned peace and quiet dignity. The confused, frightened old woman they tried to create is gone forever, replaced by someone who knows her own worth, who has faced down the worst kind of betrayal and emerged not just intact, but stronger. My spirit, which they worked so hard to crush and break, remains unbent and unbroken. I am Rose Martinez, and I am finally truly gloriously free. The future stretches before me on my own terms, surrounded by love that is honest and real and unconditional. And I've realized that living well, living authentically, surrounded by people who genuinely care, that might just be the most perfect revenge of all. What would you do if it were your mother? Share your thoughts in the comments, because somewhere out there, another elderly person is being silenced, and they need to know they're not alone. They need to know that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to disappear quietly. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for bearing witness. And remember, we may get older, but we never have to get smaller. Not for anyone.